This happened when I was 12 years old and in my year 8 in Australia. A friend and I played after-school hockey. It wasn't a popular sport, so our games took place at another school that was incredibly far away and pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The area didn't have any train stations, so we relied on 3 different buses to get there, and again to get home. The games usually took place pretty late and ended around 7 or 8 p.m. when it was already dark. All the other girls on our team got picked up by their parents, but we always bussed it home together. We didn't feel it was dangerous because there were 2 of us, and being classic 12-year-olds, we thought we were mature enough to be independent. Because we had to change buses 3 times and lived so far away, by the time we got to our second bus stop, it was usually pitch black. That stop was desolate, far from the school, in front of some kind of abandoned building, and basically a bit creepy. It was small and unsheltered, just a steel pole with a bus sign painted on it. On this particular night, it was raining as well, so we felt extra miserable standing out in the cold. Australian buses are also notoriously unreliable, so it wasn't unusual for us to wait an hour at this stop. That night, it definitely felt like we'd been waiting there for over an hour when a car pulled up in front of us. A woman was in it. She rolled down her window and asked where we were going. I told her our suburb, which was about an hour's drive away, and she said she could give us a lift if we wanted. If it had been a man, I would have been immediately suspicious and legged it. But because she was a youngish woman, looked about 40, it didn't raise any red flags in my mind. I remember thinking she must be understandably worried about 2 young girls standing out in the rain at night. I smiled, thanked her, and said it was okay. We would wait for the bus. She hesitated, then drove away. A few minutes later, she came back and pulled up in front of us again. She told us that her daughter was in a play at a high school and that she was going there anyway to pick her up. So were we sure we didn't want a lift? My friend was almost about to get in, but I hesitated, maybe thanks to my parents drilling me about stranger danger, and said, "Thank you, but it's all right. We'll wait." She was a bit pushier this time. She asked if we were sure quite a few times and mentioned her daughter again, but eventually she drove away. At this point, I think my intuition was telling me it felt a bit weird that she hadn't mentioned her daughter earlier. Another few minutes later, she came back again. This time she said she had just driven past our bus further down the road and that it had obviously skipped our stop, so she offered to give us a lift to try to catch up to it. I wouldn't put it past Australian buses to skip small stops, but it also sounded unlikely to me. By this point, I was super suspicious. I didn't really have time to think. It was more of a gut feeling than any logical reasoning. In hindsight, I question how she knew which bus number we wanted to catch, and how she knew the bus route well enough to follow it and try to catch up to it. With all politeness and smiles gone, I straight up just said no. I could tell my friend, who had been about to get into her car before, was also starting to feel the heebie-jeebies because she backed away from the road. The woman hesitated for a while. It lapsed into an awkward silence, and I remember she kept glancing at her back seat. I remember holding my hockey stick tight and playing out in my brain how I was going to defend myself. It honestly felt like forever before she finally drove away. A few minutes later, the bus came, and I had never been so relieved in my life. By that point, we were absolutely soaked. To this day, I still don't know whether she was just a worried Good Samaritan or a potential kidnapper. I flip between the two and honestly can't decide. My friend also thinks it's a mystery. We don't know if we were just being paranoid. Apologies for the length. I have tried to cut it down, but it is simply a long story. I'm hoping this is vague enough to remain anonymous, because those involved are still out there somewhere, and I'd really prefer to not encounter them again. However, I will say that this happened in the USA. For reference, I am female, and I was 20 years old at this time, living in an apartment with my mom and little brother while I attended community college. When we first moved in, the apartments were very well run, but within a short time, the manager was transferred elsewhere, and his replacement didn't have his skill at keeping undesirable types out. The police became a regular sight in our neighborhood, and it was rare a day would go by without seeing them. The woman who moved in downstairs from us began openly dealing drugs. People would come and go at all hours and leave stuffing little bags of various substances into their pockets, mostly weed, but definitely other stuff as well. They could not have been more obvious if they tried. There was always a crowd of shady-looking men with large, unfriendly dogs hanging around the yard, or even sitting on our stairs. They'd act like it was a personal insult if we interrupted them to walk up or down, and were generally quite intimidating. The breaking point didn't come until their customers started getting the wrong address and coming to our door instead. We'd be sitting in the living room and hear footsteps come up the stairs, and the doorknob would turn and jiggle against the lock. We became religious about keeping the door locked tight. One raining night, I was home alone, and somebody started just beating on the door. Not knocking, more like he thought it was a punching bag, while screaming barely comprehensible obscenities. I grabbed the biggest butcher knife out of the kitchen and shouted through the door that I was calling 911, and he ran away. In hindsight, I probably should have actually called, but I was just relieved he'd gone, and since I hadn't seen what he looked like at all, I figured it wouldn't be much use. After that, though, I always pushed the couch in front of the door before I went to bed. Mom had had enough. She tried going to the manager first and was met with a total lack of interest, so she contacted the police herself. They seemed to take her seriously and promised to investigate. The first sign of trouble came the next night. There was a lot of thumping and bumping downstairs, and a peek out the window showed people going in and out of the apartment, carrying cardboard boxes to a dented van on the street. Bright and early the next morning, the police raided the place, and it was, of course, clean as a whistle. At first, we didn't realize the implications. When it started back up again a few days later, Mom called the cops again, and the same thing happened. At this point, we realized it probably wasn't a coincidence. Somebody in the local police department was most likely tipping them off. One of the curses of a small town. I was angry and disappointed, but at least we'd tried, right? It never hurt to try. I wish. About a week later, I was getting ready for an evening class. I'd just gotten out of the shower, and I was in my bedroom in a bathrobe, picking out what I wanted to wear. I heard a loud banging on the front door, but didn't think much of it. We'd been expecting a package, and the UPS man always knocked loudly. My mom's footsteps went to answer it, and I heard her say something. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone caught my attention. I felt like something was wrong. I reached for my door, but before I could open it, it flew open in my face. All my shocked brain could grasp was huge man with gun in my bedroom before I was grabbed by the shoulders and flung to the floor. I honestly thought the druggies downstairs had come to get us once and for all. I thought I was about to be raped and murdered. I'd had an issue with one of my wrists for years due to a childhood injury. I'd had it operated on twice, and this was not more than a few months after the second operation. Naturally, I managed to land with my full weight on that wrist, and something crunched horribly. I did what any tough person would do, immediately burst into tears, and sat there clutching my wrist, waiting to die. I must not have looked very threatening, because the man stepped back a bit, and that's when I saw the police on the front of his vest. The next few minutes were a blur. Somehow I was herded into the living room with my mom, and the cop left after saying only, "Wait here." I was dazed. Mom was hysterical. There was shouting and activity outside. After a short while, the cop returned and informed us, "Sorry, wrong address. Shit happens. We can't be perfect all the time. My name is Officer Drennan. Here's my card. You can call if you have any questions." And then he left. I went straight to the emergency room and spent the next 2 hours getting my wrist x-rayed and splinted. Then I went to math class because I didn't know what else to do, and I was terrified of being at home. I learned nothing, but my teacher and classmates were supportive. The next morning, someone knocked on the door. It was Officer Drennan again. I started hyperventilating and hid in the bathroom, so I didn't hear everything, but I heard when Mom slammed the door. She was absolutely furious. Apparently, Officer Drennan had brought a carefully prepared document he wanted us to sign, basically saying we understood it was a mistake and that we wouldn't seek legal action. She told him to go to hell and shut the door. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. A nurse from the ER said someone claiming to be law enforcement had come by trying to get my ER visit records. They didn't release anything without my permission. Oh, hell no. Further questions revealed that the man matched Officer Drennan's description. He had told the nurse he was not the officer involved, just someone investigating the incident. People started giving me weird looks when I told them what happened. Every time I said his name, Officer Drennan, they'd get this grim expression and tell me their own horror story. A high school teacher said he shot one of her former students during a marijuana bust and left him to bleed out. Another officer had to do first aid to save him. A neighbor said he dragged their disabled uncle down concrete steps by the feet, smashing his head on every step. Another said Officer Drennan pulled him from the shower by his hair and held a gun to his head over a parole violation. And Google said he'd once been fired from a nearby city for shooting a handcuffed man in the head, claiming it was self-defense. Fired, but never charged. The medical bills were over $7,000. I didn't have insurance. I had no choice but to file a suit. I got a lawyer and submitted a claim. And that's when things escalated. Disturbing phone calls at night. Sometimes silence, sometimes breathing, sometimes disgusting sexual comments. When we stopped answering, they rang nonstop. One morning, Mom opened her car door to find the handle had been coated with a caustic chemical. She ended up with burns and another ER visit. During driving practice in the rain, I flipped on the windshield wipers. Someone had coated them in oily grime. It smeared across the glass, completely blocking my vision. I barely managed to pull over. More weirdness followed. Metal muletia skulls shoved under our door. Porch furniture stolen. Boots vanished. And one morning, several pounds of weed showed up in a plastic bag on our porch. The manager actually helped for once and threw it in the dumpster. I've never felt so helpless. What was I going to do? Call the cops? A friend abroad offered a place to stay. I dropped out of school and left the country for 6 months while the lawsuit moved through court. Mom and my brother moved in with family and then vanished to another town, no forwarding address. Eventually, my tourist visa ran out. I came home, a wreck, and settled the lawsuit for a relatively small sum, just to be done with it. My lawyer got a copy of the search warrant. It was riddled with grammar errors and randomly switched between our apartment, 18, and another, 25. The suspect had a completely different name and appearance. She lived in Unit 25. Her license even said so. I don't know. I have no proof. But someone was tipping off the drug dealers downstairs, and I often wonder if that wrong address was on purpose, retaliation for trying to report them. I've regained full use of my wrist, and the panic attacks have faded. It's 6 years later. I'm finally returning to school. I feel like I lost my 20s to this nightmare, and I'm still bitter. Today, I live with friends, informally. My real address is on no documents. I get mail at a P.O. box in another town. Depending on what paperwork you look at, I live in 5 different places, and it's going to stay that way until I'm far, far from where this happened. As far as I know, nobody involved ever faced any consequences. A few years ago, my boss let my family and me stay in his mountain house. It's not a secluded home. It's actually pretty close to other houses in a nice community. But still, it feels secluded when you're inside. It was built in the 70s and has a spiral staircase. It's 2 floors. The top floor is level with the upper slope, and the bottom floor is an exact mirror of the top, level with the lower part of the slope. We usually board our dog, but since this was a last-minute trip and a big travel weekend, we had to bring her with us. The second night started off perfectly. It was cold and raining. We had the fireplace going, and we were watching The Office. The kids were asleep, and shortly after, my wife and I turned everything off, checked the doors, and went to bed. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I heard some slight thuds, but it was raining, kind of windy, and there was a tree whose branches would hit the back wall. Then I heard what sounded like someone coming up the spiral stairs. Literally, as soon as my mind processed the noise, our dog, who had been sleeping in the living room, raised absolute hell. I don't think I've ever heard her bark like that before. I had my pistol, went downstairs, and saw muddy shoe prints leading in and out of the bottom floor door. I was perplexed because I know we locked that door, and there were no signs of forced entry. While I was looking around, my wife called the police, but while she was on the call, they actually pulled up to the neighbor's house. So my wife and kids loaded into the car, and we pulled into the neighbor's driveway. I just wanted them out of the house. Come to find out, they had just experienced the same thing. Someone coming in from the bottom, dog going crazy, etc. It was strange because they also said everything had been locked up, and again, no signs of forced entry. We gave a statement to the police, and although I hated to do this because it was 11 p.m., at that point, I called my boss and told him we were going to stay in a hotel and head home the next day. It really freaked all of us out. I don't know what came of it. But about a week later, I was Googling the area again and came across one of those arrest report pages. There was a headline like, "Man arrested after alleged break-in and assault." I don't recall the exact wording. Then, about a week after that, another article came out with the victim's name. After a quick Google and property search, I found out the victim lives about 2 roads over. My gut says it's him, but I don't know. I'd hope not, because the guy was 6 feet 2 inches and about 275 pounds. We love the mountains and have been back since, but we've only stayed in hotels. We tried a nice little private cabin once, but nobody slept. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Liam and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating 2 sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. That night, a light drizzle had just begun to fall, making the pavement slightly slick and the air smell like wet pine. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny, moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, and 2 on full-sized motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through. And honestly, we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there," and "We can see you. Come on out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope we had that these were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point he started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads, far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Dylan, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him, and was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the 2 streets we were near the corner of, and explained that we needed picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us, while Liam and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Dylan arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything I had just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Dylan, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Liam and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose.